today. So what we're going to do today is we will uh, we'll talk about the execution pattern of any kind of Selenium framework, right? Uh, so the last time we talked about the basic structure of SeleniumBase, which is one of the framework that you can use with Selenium, but the execution pattern remains same with all the frameworks, right? Now we're going to talk about how we can spin up our own Selenium grid using Docker container, and then what are the advantages of using a Selenium grid, and how we can utilize the same grid using we uh, what we executed last time, right? And different parameters with those executions. So keep that in mind that the execution pattern, again, this is going to be common for all the frameworks, not just Selenium base, but any open source framework that you need. You can spin up a Selenium grid and use that Selenium grid with any framework. So today is going to be an important one. I'm not going to discuss about the framework for Selenium base at this point. I want you to learn more about how to spin up your own grid and what are the advantages of it and how to execute on it, right? So the idea is that we don't want to run anything on our local machines, right? We want to run that on a platform that is up 24/7, right? And with the advent of CI/CD tools, right, that makes it more of a necessity uh, rather than a want, right? It's not a want anymore that you can execute on a remote machine. It's a need at this point, right? And a lot of the companies are based on these execution patterns, like Sauce Labs, Testing Bot, Browser Stack, right? So we gonna look at them, look at the grid, and see what Sauce Lab has implemented, right? What How can we replicate what Sauce Lab is doing? How can we replicate uh, what other execution uh, frameworks or platforms are doing, right? So it will give you a detailed view on the Selenium grid as well as the companies associated with the Selenium execution, right? All right, so let's get started. I'm going to share my screen now. Can you guys see my screen now?
Yes, Sumit, we can see. Make sure that you increase the font. I'm sure that
Yeah,
people.
I'll do that. So the first thing that we're gonna do is we're gonna go to uh, Azure Marketplace. So our idea is to create a virtual machine and install Docker on it, right? Now, as I told in my previous, we discussed in our previous framework that Azure Marketplace is one place where you can uh, find the common community apps, and you don't have to install them manually, right? They come baked in with the deployment plan in the marketplace. So let's search for Docker and see how many uh, applications that run on top of uh, the virtual machine comes baked in. So if you look here, I can see some of the apps and some of the templates that a Microsoft Marketplace provides, right? So Docker monitoring for Azure Monitor. It comes baked in with this Docker monitoring system, Smart Docker, right? Docker Community Edition with CentOS. CentOS is the platform, OS operating system, which is a Linux operating system. And then Community Edition with different versions. So here is 7.7, here is 8.0. What we're gonna select is let's go with Docker community server with Ubuntu 18.4, right? So let's get this. So this is a virtual machine that we're going to get. And this is the app that will be installed on top of this, right? So I click on get in now. All right. So uh, this gives me the landing page for that particular app. Now you can create manually. If I go to create, then it will ask me a lot of configurations and disk and management. Uh, so what I'm going to do is I'm going to start with a preset configuration. This is one of the features of Microsoft Azure that gives you some of the pre-configured uh, machine that can go along with it. So I'm going to select the lowest one, which is dev test and a general purpose, right? I don't want a memory optimized E series or a compute optimized F series. I'm not running any of those big things. So I'm going to continue creating a win after making this selection. So now it's going to take me to some of the things which you can configure when you're creating a virtual machine. But most of the things are because we selected a template, it's automatically pre-filled, right? So I don't have to manually select all those things. So I'm going to select a resource group. I can do a create new resource group. That should be fine as well. But I already have created one. A virtual machine name, let's keep it as Docker VM, and then Azure Spot instance. So there is a difference between selecting something for longer term and Azure Spot instance, right? So if I select Spot instance, it's going to give me a machine which is cheaper. But then the idea is that you're only using it for a particular load. So if you look down, so let me increase the font size. So if you look down, it's costing me US 0.17852 per hour. Now, if I select this, it gives me whatever is available. So if I go here, select size, it gives me these are the availabilities, and this is the cost per hour. But what happens is that they can revoke this VM anytime when the availability increase. So you don't have this machine uh, permanently with you, right? Uh, so what happens is uh, when there is a need uh, in Azure to for any client, and if there is no virtual machine available for Azure, it will recall that machine, right? So be careful with the Spot instance, but then use it in your daily life because you don't need it for you only need it for a certain time frame where you're using uh, something for a short time frame for any workload, and you can use that. I'm not going to use that as of now, so I'm going to use this. So there are different uh, prices for particular Spot instance. You can select any one of them. I'm going to use the password as authentication type. So I'm going to username Docker user. So let's go to the disk section. No, I don't want to store this. So I'm going to use a standard SSD. I don't want a premium SSD or HDD. So let's go to networking. Nothing needs to be changed here. Management, nothing needs to be changed here. Boot diagnostic. So these are the selections that I've already made when I selected the template. I selected the diagnostics to be on, boot diagnostics, and other things off. Advanced, nothing I need to do. Tags. So let's do review and create. So you can directly do basics and disk and go to review and create, right? You can skip all these steps in between. So this is what it's telling me. Uh, it's the pricing that I'm going to get. for this particular instance. And then uh, let's create this. So it started a deployment. It will take a couple of minutes to complete the deployment. Now it says your deployment is underway.
So
So
they charge per hour of usage or what?
what?
They
What's
charge per hour of usage VM or what is the price?
so
Or
the
you,
no the price is so I'm going to spin up a VM right now. How
yeah,
long I use, how long I keep it up and running, the cost is based on that. So if I keep it up and running for 1 hour, the price is based on that, but it's not based on the usage. The user, you can keep it up and running and don't use it at all, right? But
okay,
you're utilizing that memory, you're utilizing that CPU from Azure, and that's going to cost you,
I see.
right? If you want to do only usage based, then don't do virtual machine. Then what you can use is you can use directly Azure Container Services, right? And then what will happen is when you use the container services, it's gonna spin up the Docker instance when you need it, right? So there will be some lag because it will take some time to spin up the Docker container, right? Or what you can do is you can keep two Docker container running most of the time, and then spin up if your workload increases. And it's auto scalable, right? So you can do it that way. But for virtual machine, it's the cost is based on you utilizing those memory and CPU and disk resources from Azure.
Okay, thank you.
So our deployment is complete. Let's go to the deployment page, and this is the resource page. So this is our VM. Uh, we have we generated a public IP address, right? Now what we're gonna use is we're gonna copy this public IP address to that VM, and then we're gonna SSH into it. Uh, and we'll SSH Docker user at the rate. This is our IP. So what we are going now is uh, we are going inside that VM, right? Now, when I SSH into a VM, what it means is I am inside that VM, and whatever command I execute after I do SSH, it's going to execute on the remote machine and not on my local machine. I'm going to say yes to this. Now it's connecting to, it's asking for the password to connect to that uh, VM. So I'm connected to the VM, and I connected as a Docker user because I created a Docker user when I initially uh, created that VM, right? And this is my instance virtual machine name, right? So the user at the rate of Docker, right? Now let's see if the Docker is installed or not. So I'll run this command Docker PSA to see if any of the images are running. I can just use Docker also to see what, so if it is installed, uh, what are the things that I can do, right? Or what are the arguments that I can use, or multiple commands that I can use. So I can use that help, uh, but this command will basically tell me what images are currently or what containers are currently running on the machine, right? So I'm pretty sure that uh, I'm running the Docker is already installed in this on this VM, right? Now what I'm gonna do is I'm gonna go to Docker Hub. And I'm gonna find the image that I'm gonna use for Selenium, right? Uh, for the grid, basically, right? So let's say Selenium. So here you can see multiple images that are there. Some are some are uh, official Selenium images, but then so these ones standalone Chrome. This is basically creating a node uh, on a single container with just the Chrome browser, creating the hub. We let's skip all this, right? What we're gonna do is we're gonna only use an abstract layer on top of this, where we're gonna use this version of Selenium, where it says Selenium in Docker solution with Chrome and Firefox plus video recording support, right? So it's one layer on top of the base Selenium, and this guy created this so that all these functionalities are already embedded in the support, and we don't have to create a Docker file manually to get this configuration done, right? So let's run this command. I need solution. So it's going to pull all those uh, all the included images, and then it will download and extract and install it for us. The second one I'm going to do on top of this is this, which is Selenium. Again, this is on this is on top of Selenium Grid itself, an on-demand dynamic local Selenium Grid with an extension to cloud testing platform, right? So I'll explain what that means, but for now, let's install this as well. So it's going to pull the different images uh, from that Docker hub, and then it's going to extract and uh, do a pull. So don't worry about what I am doing right now. When I will show you the output of what I'm doing, then it will all fit together. Right now, you might be thinking this is not something uh, very clear on why we are doing this, but once we have the output, it will be very clear. So the pull is complete. Now we're gonna do the Selenium. Okay, I need sudo.
So hey Sumit, I have a question.
Yeah, sure.
So in real time, how we decide like which images I need to download or install?
Good
Be-
question. So so when I talk about the grid, there are different execution files or hub images that you can install. You need to read the details of what exactly each image is doing, right? So for now, I'm using Selenium as an image, but when I read into detail, when I read into the image detail, it tells me that I need to, as a prerequisite, I need to install the Selenium image as well, right? So that's the whole idea. But whenever you go into Docker Hub, you need to read into the details of what that image basically does, right? And then select one that you need, right? And then in the official documentation of Selenium. So if let's go to Selenium. Uh, so this is the official Docker image for Selenium Grid, right?
Mhm.
This is the
Yeah.
base implementation. So this tells me what these images do, right? And then you
Okay.
can run those images. But this is a pretty lengthy because then you have to specify your hubs, specify your nodes, and what node you want to run what browser, and all those things, right? And this is the Docker file that you need to create, right? What kind of volume you want to mount, what if you're running Firefox, what is the image for that Firefox, and then what is the dependency. This is a basically a Docker file that you can utilize, but then it's a little lengthy process. You can have more customizations in this, uh, but you will need to know Docker in much more detail, right? Right now, we don't need to learn Docker in order to create this grid, the one that
Mhm.
I'm creating, because it's been built keeping in mind
Yeah.
that a, a Docker understanding and creating Docker file is not a prerequisite.
Okay. We are focusing on grid right now. That's why.
Correct, correct. So forget about all these what Selenium base comes with, right?
Mm.
We're not bothered about uh, what we're gonna use, what we as a entry point, what is the entry point and the hub, and what images I'm going to select.
Mhm.
All these are required if you're very specific about your grid implementation, right? And you want a lot of customization in it.
Yeah.
All right.
Yeah. And second thing, sorry. Yeah. You said some of images are official. So what about
Yep.
others? Like, is it?
So so I'll tell you, this is what happens, right? So Selenium is by de facto the original owner of of the base code, right?
Mhm.
When we talk about Selenium base, that's not that doesn't have a official seal of Selenium, right? It's built on top of Selenium,
Yeah.
right? So what I mean by Selenium official is what Selenium releases as part of their product, right?
Mhm.
So Selenium is a product that is being built by multiple contributors, open source contributors. But then you can build a lot of things on top of an open source project or open source code, but then that doesn't mean that the Selenium endorses that particular framework, right?
Okay. Yeah.
So let's do this. Let's let's run this, right? So I'll explain this a bit. So what I'm doing here is I'm running uh, these two images, right? So I'm doing a Docker run with cleanup, and then TI means that I'm running uh, in a pseudo console, right? The name that I want to specify and the port that I want to run it. The V is basically your uh, this is basically your mounting, and where and in the videos, and this is the location where the videos will be stored. And then I'm running this as a privileged user, so it takes less time with permissions and access out of the way, right? So let's run this. So it's now starting. So now you can see how easy it is to just spin up a grid container, right? I'm not using any of the hub configuration or any of the node configuration, any of the browser configurations. They're all gone, right? They're all built in into this images. So now it says that Selenium is now ready. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to go uh, to this IP and see if it is actually uh, enabled or not. So this is the URL that I need to type to see uh, any live execution that is happening on that remote. So this is one of the things that is embedded and which gives us a better understanding of what is getting executed on that particular server, right? Otherwise, there is no way to know until unless you go into that server, right? Okay, so okay, so we haven't opened up the port. So what we need to do is we need to go to networking in Azure and add an inbound rule which says from any IP uh, uh, to any source with any port range, uh, any destination on this server and destination port range, let me specify only one port. I need to allow the incoming inbound access, right? Uh, So basically, if anyone outside this network, the Azure network, hits this port 4444, then it should allow that access. So I'm basically whitelisting this port. So it's creating the security rule. It will tell me once it is enabled. Yeah, so the rule is created. So now if I run now it should show me that these are two containers that has been spun up, each with the latest Chrome version and a Firefox version, right? So what I'm going to do now is execute one of the scripts that we ran previously uh, and see if it gets executed on this or not. So I'm going to open up a new terminal. Let's first run this, right? And run this on the local first, right? Now, if you see, this is how it runs in the local, and these are the tests that we are only going to execute, let's say 2 tests, right? So this is the first test that I'm executing. It passed. This is the second test. And all these are running on local, right? That means your machine needs to be up and running all the time. Okay, so I completed the 2 tests. It passed. Now let's run on this particular server, right? So what I'm going to do. Yeah, let's do this. Let's run the same test, but on this server and this port. And let's copy the server, right? So we copied the server. Now let's execute on this server. So we are running on 52.234, 178, 193, and then port 44. So all these 2 tests should now start executing on the server, right? So now you can see inside that server that all the 2 tests are getting executed. Right? So 1 test finished. So, and the second test start. Now let's get into more details, right? So what happened? Why it didn't run on the same Docker container? And what will happen once a test executes? Now this container will destroy itself, right? So if I refresh, these 2 containers will not exist anymore because this is on demand. And now our configuration is such that now the 2 new containers will spin up in its place, right? And it's auto scalable. So if you give, if you're running 3 tests, it's going to spin up 3 containers. So you're never short of browsers. And all these are running in their own particular VNCs. What it means is that you consider each Docker container as a separate machine, right? So there are no focus issues, right? There are no interlocking between 2 browsers at all, right? So all these give benefit in terms of, let's say I'm running 3 tests. I cannot run it on a single machine because they're on the same app and they might have focus issues or uh, Windows title issues in terms of that uh, index issues where I'm trying to click on one element, but the element is not there, but it's going to another element on different on the second browser and clicking on it, right? So it's self-destructed and spun up 2 new containers. So now I'll run one more to show you the benefit of this, right? So let's run one more and let's do this, right? Now I'll run both the tests parallelly, right? I don't want to run them sequentially. So let's see now. Now, if you see, both the tests are running parallelly, right? So this is the biggest benefit of having a remote execution with Docker containers, that you don't have to be worried about the browsers and the focus issues and other things, right? So Let's run now. Let's run on the Firefox browser, right? So if I run now if I look here, refresh the page. So now it's executing on the Firefox browser. So if I expand this, finished, I expand this. Now, if you look here, it's the Firefox browser and not the Chrome browser. So it shows me here, whatever is faded out, that means it executed on that browser, right? Good, all right. And now they will self-destruct themselves and spin up again. So now it's one, it's spinning up another one, right? And they're auto-scalable, right? So good part is that you don't have to be worried about how many concurrent tests you are running. You can run 100 tests if you have enough infrastructure. Let's say you have 32 or 64 GB server, you can run 100 tests together, right? And this will cut down a lot of your execution time, right? Now, let's see the good part, right? Now, it has a dashboard associated as well. So if I go here, now all these are having a video recorded as well. So if something fails, it will show me there is a failure, and also it will give me the video execution of your particular test as well, right? Very helpful. When there is a failure, you can directly go here, look at the execution video and see if your test, where it actually failed, right? And then it gives me some more details on the timings as well as the screen sizes. And then it provides me with the logs as well. So it provides me with the Selenium logs, as well as browser driver logs as well. So whenever something fails, you can use these logs to figure out what exactly went wrong. Browser driver logs is basically your grid logs, and Selenium logs is basically your execution logs, right? So it launched the grid, and then uh, these are the things that it ran, right? And so very helpful for debugging purpose. And then where we spin up the browser, right? Now it gives me a, so these are the logs that has been generated, and I'm directly this is the standard out in that particular server. I'm doing a attachment to it, right? And then these are the log levels that I can view. It's somewhat helpful when you are actually doing a debugging, right? Uh, so those kind of things. So the idea is that you are not creating a lot of things. The idea is that it's baked in with those images, right? And then it is this utilization that you can really uh, use in terms of one level on top of the official Selenium Docker images, because the Selenium Docker image won't come with all these features, right? All these features have been created by another open source community, uh, but on top of Selenium, right? So Selenium has a different community. Selenium has a different community. They're building on top of Selenium Docker images, and they're adding these features so that the grid becomes really easy, right? Any questions to now?
So Sumit, will it create, let's say we have 50 or 100 test cases, so will it create 50 or 100 containers and execute parallelly? Or?
That's correct.
Okay.
So if you want to run 50, all the 50 test cases together. So what I did here was basically when I ran this command,
Mm-hmm.
I ran as number of parallel executions as 2. If I
Mm-hmm.
provide it as I have 100 test cases and I give the number as 100, it will run all the 100 together.
Okay.
But the only part that you need to consider is that your memory and CPU should be enough to handle those 100 containers,
Mm-hmm.
right?
Yeah.
Generally, the one that I'm using, it generally can take up the load of at least 30 containers, 20 or 30 containers, not more than that. So if you really need to ramp up to 100, your infrastructure, CPU and memory wise should be really good.
Mm-hmm. Okay. Yeah. Thank you.
Any more questions on the grid? So what we are basically doing here is we are using our previous session test, and we are running it on the Selenium grid, right? Where we don't have to be worried about if these browsers are installed on our machines, right? We are not worried about the focus issues and the inability for us to do anything else when the tests are running, right? Your machine is mostly blocked when you're running any automation on your local. You basically can't do anything else, right? And then uh, it also provides auto scalability feature. So your machine, if it spins up multiple browsers, it's going to get focus issues, right? And then video recordings as well as logs, another great feature that we need. And then basically your live view of that remote server, right? Because the server is in Linux. Linux, uh, you are going into the Linux, creating a virtual VNC, right? Which is basically your virtual UI, right? And then it shows on top of it, right? And so you can view live on what executions are going on, right? So all these are great benefits on the grid. Now let's talk about some of the features of Selenium, right? Let's go to it, right? Now, these are some of the uh, features of Selenium, right? So you can it, it will provide as an extension with the third party cloud-based uh, platforms like Sauce Labs, Browser Stack, Testing Bot, Lambda Test, cross browser testing. All these are great platforms, but they're all built on the fundamental of Selenium Grid, right? And then you can customize screen height and width. Uh, you can run more than one test per node. So uh, I can run on the same node. I can run the same test on Chrome and Firefox together, right? Uh, so that is a great feature, right? So the same node will run. So the same test will run twice, one on Firefox, one on Chrome, right? Uh, the only constraint right now is that because it's a Linux server, it doesn't support IE. For it, it needs a Windows machine. And then some of the configurations, right? So how many desired containers? By default, it's 2. You can increase that by providing this parameter when you give the Docker command, right? When we were giving the Docker command, Docker run command. Let's see if I can find it. Oh yeah. Okay. So when we gave that Docker run command, we can use this parameter to have a default. So currently when I look, it's 2. So it's 2, but you can change it based on, so it will take less time to spin up the new instance. So let's say you're running 50 instances in parallel. So it's going to wait for each container to load, right? Or else you can give this parameter and just spin up 50 containers and then run them. It won't take that much time, right? And then Sauce Labs, if you're enabling this, it starts Sauce Labs, browser stack, again, different platforms. And then you can start a tunnel with those platforms, right? Video recording, you can disable or enable it. You can specify at what screen width and height, very important, that you want to run. So another great feature of this VNC server is that you can specify any screen width and height, right? Whereas if you run it in your local, you're very limited with whatever max your machine uh, configuration in terms of uh, height and width is, right? So this gives us a pretty much flexibility on setting up any screen width and height. And then different, you can set up security by setting up a grid username and grid password and the max test sessions, right? So by default, it's 1. So it's going to run 1 per container, but you can set it to run not destroy and run it for at least 5 times before destroying, right? So you can uh, set those things, right? And yeah, and these are some of some of the other features where you have browser timeouts. Basically, when you're sending a request, let's say your browser. Uh, so here's the scenario, right? Now your test says look for an element, but wait for that element for uh, 5 minutes because that's the loading time of particular page, right? Uh, and your browser timeout is less than that. What will happen, right? It's not going to wait for 5 minutes. It's going to destroy the session because it will think that no request is coming, right? If your wait says that you are going to poll every 10 seconds, then it's not gonna go timeout, right? And let's say it's not able to find element, but your browser is stuck now, right? Uh, it's not closing the browser. Or you stop the test in between, right? So no more request is going to that particular container, right? Now it has to destroy itself sometime, right? It cannot keep that browser open forever. So that's one of the configuration is very important in setting up any grid, right? All right. And time to wait to start, it means that how long your test is going to wait till the container spins up. If it's going to wait more than 3 minutes, that means there's something wrong with the server. It's going to time out, right? And it's going to tell you that server container is not up and running. Right? So all these different configurations you can set and you can configure it in your grid configuration, which you will decide. But it will be based on Selenium. Again, it's one level on top of Selenium, which is Selenium Grid, which gives us these configurations can be embedded in Selenium, but then you have to write a lot of boilerplate to get to this stage, right? And then some of the things that are here have been written in order to uh, make sure that you get as much baked in functionality on grid as you can. Right. Now let's go to one of the platform, right? Let's go to Sauce Labs. So what Labs does, right? So it does give you a grid, right? But it also gives you a grid on your mobile apps as well. So what happens is the browsers are fine, but where they're building their capabilities are basically real devices, right? Uh, but now with Selenium Grid, you have the functionality uh, to have a emulator of those devices. So that's one good thing that you can spin up on the grid, where you will be able to get those mobile device emulators. But then they the, their main USP is testing on the real devices, right? That's where they live. So if you look at the solutions, let's go to automated testing. Not a very good detailed site. Let's go to browser stack. Right. So when you look at automate, it says Selenium testing at scale. This is what it means when uh, they're running on top of the grid, right? So it's running Selenium on desktop and mobile browsers. So that's what will happen on a grid. They have better platform, but they're all built on top of the Selenium architecture. And then uh, you can definitely create a tunnel using your Selenium grid to run those tests. But then these will cost you. So if you go here on the pricing, it will cost you some amount per month. Uh, do take a look at this, register for free. Some of the tests are free. So you can go here and uh, utilize some of the same features that we talked about in the grid, and then you can create your own grid like we did today. Uh, the only thing is that you have to maintain a little bit on that grid, but that comes without any cost, right? So for any personal needs or enterprise needs as well. So I'm using this grid a lot in my company because we don't have a requirement to do a lot of cross-browser testing. Um, so we make sure that the functionality is tested and the flows are tested using normal browsers. Only the UI UX testing that we do it cross browser, but then we don't have to take the big plan with them. We can do with the small plan as well. So if you look here, if I change configuration, it's gonna go, the cost will keep rising. So even if I run 25 pallet tests, it's going to cost me this month, right? So you can look at the pricing. Whereas if I do the grade, I can run 25 pallet tests without paying anything, right? And then for one test only, it's going to cost me this much per month, right? And then if I have 100, okay. So you can imagine the cost that it will have if you want to use one of these features, right? You want to run more than 25 tests in parallel. This is what you are paying monthly, right? So you can do away with the cost. You don't need your company to pay that amount of money in order to run functional and workflow test. For the UI UX test, I don't need to run parallel. I can use the minimum plan and I can basically run those UI UX tests. It might take a little longer for multiple browsers, but then I'm saving a lot of money. Any questions?
So big companies are using the grid as well, or Sauce Lab and the paid versions?
Which companies are using?
Hmm?
Okay.
Like your bank or any secure companies where the data privacy is important, so they are using
Okay. So when it comes to on the security aspect, less companies prefer going on cloud with their test, right? So when you talk about banks, I've worked with some banks where they said uh, this data that we are dealing with is client confidential. So we don't want to give it to another third party. So create a grid in-house, right? Uh, AWS, it's a different thing, right? Azure, it's a different thing. But going to a third party is cause some security concern. It has to go through some of the validations, right? Though they're very secure, but then they're third party, right? They also have infrastructure which is either built on one of these AWS and Azure services, right? Uh, and then Azure also comes with one of the device farms that you can use, right? But then uh, when you talk about the grid structure, most of the grids are maintained in house. But nowadays, because of the uh, limitations of the Linux platform, right? A lot of people have started, especially the new and upcoming companies, the startups are using Selenium, are using Browser Stack or Sauce Labs to a great extent because it saves a lot of time. And then it also helps you test on multiple mobile platforms and with different with different with different configurations, right? So if I want to test on, let's say, uh, my my app, right? I can't use Selenium Grid because it doesn't get connected to a mobile device, right? And I want to test it on a real device. So in that regards, Sauce Labs and Browser Stack helps a lot. And a lot of adoption is there in terms of mobile testing on these platforms. And also with some of the browser testing where uh, cross-browser functionality is very important, right? Where you want to see that your test runs on Chrome, Firefox, Opera, uh, and as well as Safari, IE, and but with different screen sizes and width, right? You want to check if that browser runs on mobile perfectly or not, right? That application on, let's say, Chrome browser on Android runs on it or not, right? So all those functionalities Selenium Grid doesn't provide, right? So that's why these companies have grown a lot. Uh, but then when you go to the basic structure of the test, we can do with most of the times you can do with your own Selenium Grid. But when it really becomes complex for cross-browser testing as well as mobile testing, these platforms are great to use.
Okay, thank you. Yeah.
Any other questions? All right. If not, I'm done for the day. First time I'm done before time. Uh, Gather, you have anything to add?
Uh, no, Sumit. I think it was a wonderful session as always. Looking forward to your future sessions. Right. Nothing to add, and I trust all the attendees had a good session from you and learned a lot for today. And I'm looking forward to see you guys in our next weekly, either on Saturday or next Wednesday, depending upon your interest. Help us to spread the word and get more people to join and benefit. That's the only ask I always have, and we always have as a team from Testoper. With that, let's close the call. You guys have a great evening, and people attending from Switzerland, great night. It was too late, but still, you guys attended. We'll talk soon. Take care. Bye bye.
All right. Thank you, everyone.